Family laughed at my small business, and my brother called me a loser. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and flipped the last burger on the grill. The air smelled like charred meat, cheap beer, and freshly cut grass. Classic family cookout. My parents' backyard had seen countless gatherings like this, where everyone pretended to be supportive while secretly judging each other. Today, I was a target. I had spent months perfecting my craft, experimenting with different wax blends, scents, and wicks, pouring every spare minute into making something I believed in. My savings were tight, but I had a plan. I was ready to tell them. So, Ethan, my older brother Jake, leaned back in his chair, beer in hand. Still stuck in that office job? I swallowed, setting the spatula down. Actually, I quit last week. Silence. A cicada buzzed somewhere in the trees. Jake's face lit up like he'd just heard the punchline of a joke he wasn't supposed to laugh at yet. No way. And what's the plan? Gonna finally start that hot dog stand. A few chuckles from the cousins. Mom shot him a look but said nothing. My dad kept staring at his plate. Not exactly, I said, gripping my beer tighter. I'm starting my own business. Jake snorted. Doing what? I took a breath. Handmade candles. There was a pause, then outright laughter. Jake nearly choked on his drink. My uncle wiped a tear from his eye. Even my mom, always the peacemaker, pressed her lips together in a way that told me she was struggling not to react. Wait, Jake gasped between laughs. He pointed at me. You quit a real job to make candles? I forced a smile, my jaw tightening. Yes. Dad finally spoke. That's different. Mom sighed. Sweetheart, that sounds lovely, but is that really a career? I mean, who even buys candles? People. Thousands of people. People who love the ambience, the scents, the craftsmanship. People who pay good money for something made with care. I knew this. But standing there, watching their faces, it didn't matter. They had already made up their minds. Jake leaned forward, shaking his head. Man, you should have run this by me first. I could have saved you a lot of trouble. You ever see a guy making candles and think, yeah, that dude's killing it? More laughter. I clenched my fist around the cold bottle, trying to keep my face neutral. The conversation moved on, but I was done. My appetite vanished. I focused on finishing up the grilling while they kept talking about real jobs, real success, real futures. Later, as I carried a stack of plates into the house, I heard my parents' voices from the kitchen. He's going to fail, Dad muttered. He'll burn through his savings in a month and come crawling back looking for a real job. Mom sighed. I just hope he figures it out before he loses everything. I stood frozen in the hallway. My stomach twisted, but something else burned underneath the disappointment. Anger. Not just at them, but at myself for expecting anything different. Fine. Let them think I'll fail. I grabbed my keys and walked out, heart pounding. If they wanted to bet against me, I'd make sure they lost. The apartment smelled like burned wax and failure. My tiny living room, once a place to crash after long shifts at the office, had transformed into a chaotic workshop. Half-melted candles stacked on every surface, wicks that refused to stay lit, and a floor permanently coated in a thin layer of wax. I had no idea what I was doing. The YouTube tutorials made it look easy. Melt the wax, add the fragrance, pour, let it set. Simple, right? Except my candles cracked down the middle, smelled either too weak or like someone had set a perfume store on fire, and burned unevenly, if they burned at all. At first, I convinced myself it was just part of the learning process. Trial and error, a few tweaks here and there, and I'd have it figured out. But weeks turned into months. My savings shrank while my failures piled up. 6 months in, I had sold exactly $385 worth of candles, barely enough to cover a fraction of the materials clogging up my apartment. Thanksgiving rolled around, and I had no way out of family dinner. The moment I walked in, Jake's smirk told me he was waiting for his moment. It didn't take long. "So, Ethan," he started, swirling his beer like some Wall Street hotshot, "how much money have you burned along with your candles?" He let the words hang just long enough for the laughter to follow. Dad chimed in next. "You know, there's no shame in going back to a real job. Mom, ever the peacemaker, tried a softer approach. Honey, maybe it's time to move on? You gave it a shot, and that's great, but some things just aren't meant to be businesses." They meant well, or at least they thought they did, but the message was clear. This was just another one of my screw-ups, another pipe dream doomed to fail. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about every single time they had told me what I couldn't do, every expectation they had set for me. Safe job, steady paycheck, nothing risky. The only problem was I had done that, and I had hated every second of it. Going back now wasn't an option. I had one last shot. If selling online wasn't working, I needed to sell in person. I started looking into local markets, farmers' fairs, and craft events. Maybe if people saw my candles, held them, smelled them, they'd actually buy them. I wasn't sure if it would work, but at this point, I didn't have much left to lose. The first time I set up my booth at the farmer's market, I felt like a total fraud. Other vendors had professional-looking setups, banners, polished branding. I had a folding table, a basic sign I printed at home, and a box of candles that had drained my savings. The entrance fee alone made my stomach turn. Money I couldn't afford to waste. The morning started slow. People strolled by, giving my table a quick glance before moving on. Some picked up a candle, sniffed, then set it down without a word. Each nonchalant shrug felt like another kick in the ribs. But I reminded myself, no one buys from the guy who looks defeated. Then a woman stopped. She picked up a candle, turned it over in her hands. "Is this soy wax?" She looked at me, genuinely interested. I nodded and explained the ingredients, how I made each one by hand. She smiled and said she'd been looking for all-natural candles for ages. When she pulled out her wallet and handed me cash, I nearly forgot to give her change. My first real sale, $10. Then another woman came by and bought two. A man picked up one for his wife. By noon, I had sold 8 candles. Not exactly world-changing, but it was progress. By the time I packed up, I had made $150, more than I had sold online in an entire month. Driving home, my hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. For the first time in 6 months, I had proof this could work. Maybe I wasn't crazy after all. The next weekend, I did it again and again. Each time, I learned a little more, what scents people liked, how to talk about my product without sounding desperate. I tweaked my branding, invested in better labels. The farmer's market became my second home, but I knew I needed to grow beyond that. Late at night, I studied Instagram marketing, watching how other small businesses built followings. I started posting high-quality photos, behind-the-scenes clips of me pouring wax, packaging orders. It was slow at first. 10 likes, then 20, then a few shares. I kept going. Then it happened. One Saturday, a customer bought a candle and told me she'd post about it on TikTok. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the next morning, I woke up to hundreds of notifications. Her video had gone viral. It was nothing fancy, just her unboxing my candle, saying how much she loved the scent, but it hit the algorithm hard. By the end of the weekend, I had 310 new orders. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. This was it. The moment everything changed. I barely slept that night. The 310 orders sitting in my inbox weren't just numbers. They were a ticking clock, a countdown to either proving myself or drowning in my own success. My apartment was too small, my hands too few. If I screwed this up, I knew I'd never recover. By morning, I had a plan. I called Emma. She had always believed in me, even when no one else did. Within an hour, she was in my kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, ready to pour wax like our lives depended on it. And for the next 2 weeks, that's exactly what we did. We melted, poured, labeled, packed, shipped. Barely ate, barely slept. My tiny apartment turned into a full-scale production line. Orders kept coming, more than I ever imagined. It was clear I couldn't keep this up in my kitchen forever. I rented a small storage space, then a bigger one. Emma brought in 2 friends to help, and before I knew it, I had a team. We weren't just making candles anymore. We were running a full-fledged business. That's when the boutique owners started calling. Small shops, local stores, they wanted my candles on their shelves. My brand, Everglow Candles, was officially in demand. I signed my first wholesale deal at a price that made my hands shake when I wrote the number. Real money, real success. And of course, that's when my family suddenly cared. At a Sunday dinner, my dad casually asked how much I was making, not in a curious, proud kind of way, more like an accountant running numbers in his head. Before I could answer, Jake jumped in, suddenly an expert on business strategy. He started talking about investors, scaling, market saturation, words he had never used before. He didn't care about candles last month, but now he wanted to help. Mom, ever the mediator, had her own pitch. My 2 unemployed cousins were struggling, and she thought it would be a wonderful gesture if I hired them. As if running a business was some family charity project. It was subtle, at first, questions disguised as concern, advice that felt more like positioning. I had spent years being the one they laughed at. Now, they saw a chance to take a piece of what I had built. I smiled, nodded, kept the peace. But inside, something was shifting. I had fought too hard for this. And if they thought I was going to hand it over, they were about to be very disappointed. The email sat in my inbox for hours before I could bring myself to open it. I already knew what it said. I had gone through 3 rounds of negotiations, legal reviews, endless phone calls. But seeing it in black and white made it real. The contract was worth $5 million. My small candle business had officially become an empire. Emma popped a bottle of champagne, and my team, yes, I actually had a team now, cheered like we had just won the Super Bowl. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. But in the back of my mind, I knew what was coming. I didn't have to wait long. My dad called that night, voice full of forced casualness. He had been thinking and figured it was time he got involved in the business. He had experience, after all, and could help with strategy. He didn't say it outright, but I knew what he meant. He wanted a cut. Jake was worse. The guy who spent months mocking me suddenly wanted in. He texted me a long message about how families should build together and how business is better when it's kept in the family. When I didn't respond, he sent another text, then another. By the next morning, he was calling nonstop. When I finally answered, he got right to the point. He wanted to be my partner, a 50-50 split. I told him no. It didn't go well. He laughed, like I had just told him the sky was green. Then, when he realized I was serious, the insult started. He accused me of forgetting where I came from, of letting money change me. He told me I was just lucky, that anyone could have done what I did. Then he hung up. By the weekend, I started hearing from other family members. My mother, softer in her approach, suggested that since I was doing so well, maybe I could help out a little. My dad wasn't as subtle. He said Jake was struggling and needed financial support. Then came the Real ask. He needed money too. He tried to sell it as a business opportunity, but I saw right through it. I stopped sharing numbers, stopped answering calls as often. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, and now I finally understood I was never going to get it. My success didn't make them proud. It made me useful. The breaking point came at a family dinner. My dad, after a few drinks, outright asked how much I could loan him. I told him no. He asked again, but this time he framed it as a favor for Jake. I told him I could help Jake find a job, but I wasn't handing out money. Silence. Then He muttered something about me being ungrateful, about family meaning nothing to me. But I wasn't the one treating family like a paycheck. I put my napkin on the table, stood up, and walked out. I built this on my own, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. A few weeks passed, and for the first time in my life, my phone was quiet. No calls from Jake, no guilt-tripping texts from my parents. Just silence. And honestly, it felt good. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. Aunt Linda. I almost didn't pick up. She had never been outright cruel, but she had laughed along with everyone else, made her fair share of snide comments. Still, something told me to answer. Her voice was different, softer. She got straight to the point. She was calling to apologize. She admitted she had always thought I was wasting my time, that she had rolled her eyes every time she heard me talk about my little candle project. But watching me prove everyone wrong had changed something in her. She wasn't just impressed. She was envious. She had always wanted to start her own business, but she never had the guts to take the leap. Seeing me succeed made her realize that maybe she had been the one making excuses all along. And for the first time, she actually said she was proud of me. I didn't know what to say. I had spent years craving validation from my family, but hearing it now, when I didn't need it anymore, felt different. It felt real. That call stuck with me, not because of the apology, but because it reminded me of how far I'd come. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built something that stood on its own. A few days later, I walked into one of the first stores that had agreed to carry my candles. I was there to check inventory, but as I wandered the aisles, I overheard a conversation near the home goods section. A woman picked up one of my candles and turned to her friend. "I heard about this brand. Everyone loves them." I stood there for a second, letting it sink in. It wasn't just a product anymore. It was something people recognized, something people wanted. My name, my work. It was out in the world, standing on its own. I didn't need my family's approval. I never did. I smiled, turned around, and walked out. My victory was mine alone, and for the first time, that was more than enough.
Bye bye.